Hey, story lovers. Get ready for a mind-blowing tale of arrogance, defiance, and a shocking twist that proves true worth can't be judged by a job title. This one will leave you speechless. Before we begin, comment below to tell us what city you're watching from. And if you love an underdog story, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content. The 42nd floor of Carter & Hayes LLP gleamed under the bright lights, despite it being close to midnight. Through the enormous glass windows, the illuminated skyscrapers of central London shimmered against the dark sky. Clara Jones pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway, the squeak of the wheels mixing with the faint hum of the vacuum cleaner she had just turned off. Her light gray uniform had a few old stains, but her brown eyes still shone with a spark of hope that almost no one noticed. She paused in front of the main boardroom, a sliver of light escaping from under the door. Inside, she could hear voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. It was surely some important meeting. Clara tilted her head slightly, not out of gossip, but to feel, even for a moment, a part of that world she had dreamed of since she was a little girl, growing up in the humble neighborhoods of Hackney. Carefully, she pulled a well-worn book from her backpack. It was a book on international law in French, borrowed from the community library. Freud International, the title read on the cover. Clara had taught herself French at 15, thanks to her grandmother, who would teach her words in the afternoons. Since then, she had dedicated herself to studying on her own, hoping that one day her resume wouldn't end up crumpled and thrown in the trash of some law firm. She turned the pages silently, repeating the legal terms as if they were prayers. Suddenly, the door swung open. Clara jumped, and the book fell to the floor. A tall man walked out of the room. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit, and his dark hair was styled with precision. It was Ethan Carter, the managing partner of Carter & Hayes, known for being a legal genius, but also for his coldness and ruthlessness. His blue eyes, as icy as his reputation, landed on the fallen book. "What are you doing?" he asked in a low voice, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Hiding and reviewing company documents while you clean?" Clara knelt to pick up her book, her heart pounding. "No, sir, it's mine." Ethan raised an eyebrow, took a step closer, and read the title aloud. "Reuter International? A cleaner reading international law in French?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Are you serious? Or are you trying to impress someone?" Clara gripped the book tightly. She knew who he was. Ethan Carter, once featured in financial magazines for climbing to the top from nothing. She had admired him, but at that moment, his arrogant gaze made her burn with indignation. "I read to learn," she replied without raising her voice, but firmly. "Not to impress anyone." He crossed his arms. For a moment, he seemed intrigued, as if he had just discovered a new toy. "To learn? What for? To mop with better technique?" Then he looked back at the boardroom, where his partners were still meeting. "Since you feel so smart, come in. Let's see if it's true." Clara froze. She wasn't allowed in that room. But Ethan's challenging gaze dared her to move. She took a deep breath and walked in, holding her book like a shield. The air inside smelled of expensive perfume and tension. 7 lawyers in designer suits sat around the mahogany table. Papers were scattered everywhere, along with a thick contract and a half-empty bottle of wine. An elderly lawyer, Mr. Hayes, was talking about clauses in a negotiation with a French client. Ethan raised his hand, stopping him. "We have an expert here tonight," he said mockingly, emphasizing the word. He turned to Clara. "She says she can read law in French. Go on, prove it." He tossed her a sheet from the contract, covered in tiny print. "Translate this. If you're as smart as you think, do it." Laughter began to ripple through the room. Some shook their heads. Clara felt their gazes fixed on her, as if she were a curiosity taken from a cage. She was trembling, but not from fear. It was rage. It wasn't a joke, though to them it was. She took a breath, placed her book on the table, and began to read aloud. Her pronunciation was clear. Every word flowed rhythmically. Clause 14.2. Party A agrees to transfer control of the assets within 90 days of signing, provided that Party B completes full payment before the deadline. She paused. Then she looked directly at Ethan. But there's a problem. Silence fell over the room. Ethan frowned. What problem? Clara pointed to a line in small print. This note is mistranslated in the English version. The French version says that if Party B does not pay on time, Party A has the right to reclaim the assets and charge a 20% penalty. But the translated English version only says they can reclaim the assets. If you sign this as it is, the firm could lose millions if the partner defaults. Mr. Hayes snatched the contract from her, flipping through the pages, his face pale. She's right, he stammered. How did I miss that? He looked at the others, alarmed. Who approved this translation? Ethan stood still, his hand gripping the edge of the table. His gaze was no longer mocking. It was something else. Surprise? Frustration? He couldn't accept that a cleaning lady had just saved them from a catastrophic error. Impressive, he said coldly. But don't think you can come in here and act like you're better than us. I didn't come here, Clara replied, looking at him fiercely. You brought me in. If you didn't want the truth, you shouldn't have challenged me. She grabbed her cart and walked out of the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind her. Ethan stood watching her, his heart beating faster than usual. He hadn't felt that in years. Someone challenging him like that, putting him in his place. An image appeared in his mind, a poor boy in Manchester, being ridiculed for dreaming of being a lawyer. That boy promised never to let anyone humiliate him again. But now, at the top, Ethan Carter wondered. Had he become the very person he had hated? The dim light of the computer illuminated the face of Ethan Carter, highlighting the shadows of his firm jaw and his dark circles. His office on the 42nd floor was a silent, elegant space, decorated with dark mahogany furniture and walls lined with legal books. The clock showed 2 a.m., but sleep had never been his friend. Since he was a boy in a working-class neighborhood of Manchester, he knew that rest was a luxury not everyone could afford. On the screen, a file glowed with the name Clara Jones, personnel file. He had requested it right after the incident in the boardroom. He didn't know exactly why. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe because of that defiant look that still haunted his thoughts. 25 years old, he murmured, reading aloud. Graduated with honors from the University of East London. No master's degrees, no recommendations from famous professors. Just a long list of low-paying jobs. Waitress, French tutor, cleaning staff. He frowned at another detail. Was accepted with a full scholarship to the London School of Economics, but rejected it for personal reasons. She rejected the LSE? He wondered aloud. Who rejects that? He opened another browser tab and looked for her social media. Almost empty. A few posts about debate competitions and a photo with an elderly woman, probably her mother. The caption read, "Thank you, Mum, for never stopping believing in me." He felt a knot in his chest. He remembered his own mother, who worked double shift in a cafeteria to pay for his books. He never saw her again after the day of his graduation from Oxford, when a heart attack took her while he was in an interview. He closed the laptop with a sigh and leaned back in his chair. Clara Jones reminded him of himself. A person with talent, with a hunger to succeed, but without connections. And yet there she was. He, the managing partner of one of the most important firms in the country. She, cleaning floors in his office. The next morning, Clara stood in front of the Human Resources office, her hands gripping the strap of her backpack. She had been summoned for breaking internal protocols, as if she had caused a scandal, but she knew it was all about him. Ethan Carter. Someone like him wouldn't tolerate a cleaner showing him up. She took a deep breath and walked in. Mrs. Reynolds, the head of HR, was sitting behind her desk. Ethan was there too, looking out the window with a serious expression. The sunlight outlined his silhouette as if he were made of marble. "Miss Jones," Mrs. Reynolds began in a dry tone, "you entered a private board meeting without authorization. Are you aware that this could result in dismissal?" Clara felt the heat rise to her face, but she remained calm. "I didn't interrupt," she said firmly. "I was asked to translate. If I had refused, I would probably be here, accused of disobeying an order." Mrs. Reynolds glanced at Ethan, awaiting instructions. He turned slowly and observed her coldly. "You're good at inventing excuses, Jones, but you don't belong in that room. You're cleaning staff, not a lawyer." Clara clenched her fists, feeling her nails dig into her palms. She wanted to scream, to tell him about the sleepless nights studying, the rejection letters, the debts, and her sick mother at home. But she wouldn't. She wasn't going to give them that power. "I didn't ask to be in that room," she replied, looking at him directly. "You put me in there to mock me. If you want to punish me for doing the right thing, go ahead." Silence took over the room. Mrs. Reynolds coughed, uncomfortable. It was unusual for a staff member to speak with such a tone. Ethan didn't move either. He looked at her with a different intensity. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Interest. As if he couldn't understand why this woman wouldn't break. "Are you finished?" he asked in a low voice. "No," Clara replied. "If this firm is not willing to listen to the truth from someone who cleans the floors, then the problem is not me." She turned to leave, but he stopped her. "Wait." She stood still, not turning around. She heard his steps approach, and the faint whisper of his breath behind her. "You have a lot of confidence, Jones," he said, in an almost inaudible voice. "But confidence isn't enough. You'll have to prove you're more than just a girl who knows French." Clara turned around, facing him. "I didn't come here to prove anything to you. I'm here to prove to myself that I can." She walked out of the office, leaving Ethan with his fists clenched at his sides. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him feel so disarmed. That night, Ethan was alone in his office again. A half-empty bottle of whiskey rested on the table. He didn't drink to get drunk, but to forget. But Clara's image kept coming back, her firm gaze, her confident voice. He reopened her personnel file and read it again carefully. A small paragraph at the end hit him in the chest. "Reason for rejecting LSE scholarship: to care for mother with terminal illness." He closed his eyes. It was as if he had been slapped with his own past. He had chosen his career over his mother. She had done the opposite. He picked up the phone. "Get me more information on Clara Jones," he told his assistant. "Family, debts, whatever." He hung up and stared out the window. The city was still lit up as always, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt it was empty. Clara Jones wasn't just another employee. She was a reflection of who he was and what he had lost. The small flat in this doctor's area of London smelled of bleach and burnt coffee. Clara Jones arranged a tray with vegetable soup next to the bed, where her mother, Maria, rested with shallow breaths. "Try to eat a little, Mum," Clara said with a forced smile. The woman, with graying hair and a tired gaze, shook her head. "You should rest, my child. I saw you come home from work in the early morning." Clara didn't reply. She couldn't tell her that the night shift cleaning at Carter and Hayes was the only thing keeping them afloat. The small room they shared with two other tenants a chef, and a nursing student, was barely enough to pay for gas, medicine, and the internet, which was essential for Clara to continue studying on her own. She sat on an old wooden chair and opened her laptop. On the screen, an unread email. "Thank you for your interest. We have chosen another candidate for the legal assistant position." She closed it without reading further. It was the third time she had applied for a position within the firm. First as an intern, then as a legal assistant, and finally as a secretary. In all of them, she was told the same thing: incompatible profile. But Clara knew what it really meant. Without a known surname, without a renowned university, her resume was invisible. Despite everything, she still dreamed of practicing. Since she was at the public university, she spent nights reading international law. Her dream was to be in a meeting, debating legal clauses, not mopping outside of them. She sighed and looked out the window. The city seemed indifferent. Cars passing, gray buildings, people in a hurry. She remembered her university years, when she had energy, desire, and a blind faith that what she was doing would one day bear fruit. But reality had hit her hard. The world wasn't made for girls without connections, much less if they also took care of a sick mother. In another part of the city, in a perfectly decorated office with leather-bound books and framed diplomas, Ethan Carter was still reading a report. "Lives in a tenement in the doctor's area," his assistant read. "Shares a bathroom, cares for her mother with heart failure, has had several temporary jobs, and she won a national constitutional law competition in her second year of university." Ethan placed the report on his desk. He was silent. The information, far from generating pity, caused an unease he didn't know how to handle. He remembered when he worked in a corner shop, when customers laughed at his old clothes. He remembered the promise he made to himself. "No one will ever laugh at me again." But at what cost? At what point did he stop fighting for something bigger than his name on the office door? He grabbed the phone. "Schedule a meeting with Clara Jones. Today." He wasn't sure what he intended. He wasn't going to apologize. He didn't apologize. He just wanted to see her, to understand if that woman was really what she seemed. That same afternoon, Clara received the notice. The boss wanted to see her. Again. She felt her stomach churn. She thought the French contract thing had been forgotten. But no. There she was, again, in front of that mahogany door, with her heart pounding. "Come in," a voice said from the other side. She entered. The office was like a movie. Mahogany desk, large windows, the smell of wood and freshly brewed coffee. Ethan Carter was standing, in a perfect gray suit, as immaculate as his hairstyle. "Mr. Carter," Clara said, without sitting down. "If you're going to fire me, don't beat around the bush. I'd rather you just say it." He raised an eyebrow. He smiled slightly, as if he couldn't help it. "Fire you? Please, I don't waste talent." He slid a printed sheet across the table. Clara read it. It was an offer. An unpaid legal apprenticeship, access to private sessions, possibility of promotion based on performance. It was exactly what she had always wanted. A real opportunity at a renowned firm. But there was a detail she couldn't ignore. The word unpaid cut through her like a knife. She worked 16 hours a day. She took care of her mother. She had debts. A non-paid position was, in her world, impossible. She gave him back the sheet. "Thank you, but I can't accept it." He frowned. "You're going to reject something that hundreds would kill for? Do you know what this is?" Clara asked without hesitation. "It's charity disguised as an opportunity. If you think my work is worth £0, then you don't respect me. And if you don't respect me, I'm not interested in being here." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Ethan looked at her as if she were the first person in years to speak to him with such clarity. "You think I don't believe in you?" he said, walking towards her. Then tell me, why am I here wasting my time with a cleaner instead of closing a £10 million contract? Clara didn't move. Her voice trembled inside, but on the outside, it was firm. Because you're curious. But curiosity isn't respect. I don't hate you, Mr. Carter. What I hate is having to beg for opportunities from people who never saw me. He stood still. Her words hit him hard. He remembered his professors at his private university telling him he didn't have the profile to litigate in international courts. He remembered how he had surpassed them all, but he also remembered how he had stopped looking back. "You're very determined," he said finally. "But determination doesn't pay the bills. Think about it. This opportunity won't come again." Clara held his gaze. "I don't need handouts. I'll make my own way." And she left. That night, she returned home and sat next to her mother. Maria looked at her tenderly. "You don't have to do everything by yourself, my child. I know you can do it." Clara smiled, but she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had rejected Ethan Carter. Could she hold out much longer? At the top of the firm, Ethan spun a silver pen between his fingers. He looked at the contract she had rejected and thought about that version of himself who once also said, "I'd rather die of hunger than beg for respect." And for the first time, he wondered if he could ever be that person again. Let's play a secret game for those who are still here. Leave the word cheese in the comments. The others won't even notice. Let's continue the story. Night fell over the city like a heavy blanket. Clara Jones arrived at the firm minutes before her shift began. She went up the elevator, greeted the guards with a slight nod, and headed to the cleaning area to get her cart. She feigned normalcy, but inside, she felt a mix of anxiety and contained rage. She couldn't stop thinking about that offer disguised as a favor, and how she had had to reject, once again, what she so desired, because she couldn't afford to work without pay. She walked down the halls of the 42nd floor with a firm step, cleaning without stopping, ignoring the fleeting glances from some employees. She reached the boardroom, where the ajar door let out fragments of a conversation. She recognized the voice of one of the main partners, Mr. Hayes, speaking confidently in the middle of a meeting with French representatives. Clause 9.3. "We both share the financial risk equally," he said, self-assured. Clara froze for an instant. That clause sounded familiar. She had read it many times in her international law book. Partie des risques was not translated as they were understanding it. Something inside her ignited. She didn't want to get involved, but if that clause was misinterpreted, the firm could be about to sign a dangerous agreement. She hesitated for a moment, then took out her phone and drafted an email with trembling hands. "Dear Mr. Carter, please forgive me for taking this liberty, but I overheard the interpretation of Clause 9.3. The term partie des risques does not mean equally shared risk. According to the original contract, if certain liquidity conditions are not met, all responsibility falls on Party A. I suggest you review it before proceeding. Clara Jones." She attached the section of the contract and sent it. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't know if she would be fired for daring to intervene again, but she preferred that to staying silent when something was wrong. Inside the room, Ethan stood at the head of the table, listening to the French partners with a neutral expression. Just then, his phone vibrated. He saw Clara Jones in the email notification. He frowned, opened it, and read it quickly. When he finished, he looked up with a seriousness no one else noticed as unusual. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, taking the contract paper. He approached Mr. Hayes and whispered in his ear. Then he handed him his phone with the email. "Read it, and explain to me why we were about to sign something that would leave us bankrupt if the other party fails." Mr. Hayes turned pale. He took the document and began to review it desperately. I didn't see that part. I didn't realize. One of the French partners asked to see the original document. He read it in a low voice, nodded slowly, and then spoke aloud. That clause must be modified. If not, the agreement will not be fair to you. We appreciate your attention to detail. The tension in the room slowly dissolved. The deal was still on, but thanks to the observations sent from the hallway by a young woman who was cleaning the office windows, Ethan said nothing more. He just looked at Mr. Hayes, who avoided his gaze, and then put his phone back in his pocket. The next morning, Clara was cleaning the firm's kitchen area when a young receptionist rushed over. "Miss Jones, Mr. Carter wants to see you, in the boardroom, now." Clara left the rag in the sink and swallowed hard. What was happening now? When she arrived, the room was occupied by the main legal team. They all looked at her as she entered, some with disdain, others with surprise. Ethan was standing, his arms crossed, and he looked at her directly. "Miss Jones," he said, without beating around the bush. "Thanks to your email, a serious error was avoided in a deal worth over £50 million. On behalf of the firm, thank you." An awkward silence fell over everyone. Clara felt their stares piercing her. Mr. Hayes was sitting, his lips pressed together. One of the lawyers whispered something. Another coughed. But Hayes didn't get fired. And now we're going to congratulate the cleaning lady? Seriously? Clara clenched her teeth. She was fed up. "And yet, I did his job better than you did, sir," she said with a firm voice. "If you don't like being corrected by someone like me, maybe next time you'll read the contract more carefully." A barely contained huff came from a corner. Someone stifled a laugh. Ethan raised his hand. "Enough," he ordered, his voice serious. Then he turned to her. "You can leave, Miss Jones. And once again, good work." Clara walked out of the room, her heart pounding. She didn't know if she had just dug her own grave or taken an important step. But she felt free. She had said what she had to say. That night, Ethan reread Clara's email. It was written with precision, without frills, without arrogance. She had sent it privately, without exposing anyone. She had been more professional than many of the lawyers on his payroll. He stared at the screen for a few minutes. Then he opened another blank document. He wrote, "Internal Legal Training Program. Objective, to integrate talented people outside traditional channels. Launch date, this month. First invited candidate, Clara Jones. Conditions, fair compensation, direct supervision. Approved by management." He closed the document and sent it to HR. For the first time in a long time, he felt something new. Not pride, not professional interest. Something akin to hope. Not for the firm, for himself. Clara Jones wasn't just a legal prospect. She was a reminder of everything he had forgotten. The 42nd floor of Carter and Hayes, once a symbol of aspiration for Clara Jones, now felt like a cage of whispers. She pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, her gaze fixed forward. But she couldn't ignore the stifled giggles or whispered comments behind her back. Something had changed since that night she worked side by side with Ethan Carter, reviewing cases for the new pro bono program. She had felt it, and now she understood it perfectly. Just that morning, when she went to pick up her shift at HR, Mrs. Reynolds, with an unfriendly face, handed her a sheet of paper. "As of today, assigned to archive and basement cleaning," she said, without further explanation. Clara felt a knot in her throat. The basement was a punishment, a damp, forgotten place where old documents and broken furniture were stored. And she knew it well. It was the firm's quietest way of saying, "We don't like you." She turned to protest, but before she could open her mouth, a sharp voice interrupted her from the corner. Oh, come on, don't make that face, Jones. Not everyone climbs the ladder by strategically using a broom. There she was, Sophia Reynolds, senior lawyer, Ethan's ex-girlfriend. Always dressed perfectly, with her shiny heels and her venomous tone. The rumor had already spread. "Excuse me?" Clara replied, turning with a flushed face. "Come on, don't play dumb," Sophia said, crossing her arms. "The boss, the pro bono program, your legal contributions. All very convenient, wasn't it? If you have proof, show it," Clara replied, controlling the tremor in her voice. "If not, don't waste my time." And without waiting for a response, she left. But Sophia's words followed her like a shadow. The basement smelled of dust and dampness. Clara went down the stairs carrying a box of cleaning supplies. She turned on an old lamp. The place was gloomy, with rusty filing cabinets and broken-down furniture. The silence there was different, as if the place knew that those who came to that corner were sent there as punishment. She started to work, not out of submission but out of necessity. Her mother was still sick. The medicine, the studies, the oxygen, the food, everything cost money. And despite the pain, Clara did not break down. She knew how to endure. She always had. Meanwhile, on the floor above, Ethan Carter stood by the window of his office, clenching his jaw. His assistant had just informed him of the inevitable. "Sir, the rumors are circulating throughout the office. Some partners say Miss Jones has received unofficial privileges." Ethan felt his blood boil. And who decided to punish her by sending her to the basement? The board. They voted this morning. They said it was a way to avoid perception conflicts. He didn't reply. He just looked out at the city sky. He didn't need to ask where the stab came from. Sophia Reynolds. Since their breakup, she had been waiting for the slightest opportunity to destabilize him. But what hurt him the most was not the personal attack, but the cowardice of the other partners. Was this how they rewarded someone who had saved £2 million contracts? "Call a board meeting," he ordered. "Now." Minutes later, the same boardroom that had witnessed Clara's first defiance was filled with the same cold faces. Mr. Hayes, Sophia, two other partners, all sitting with fake expressions of calmness. Ethan remained standing. "We're going to talk about Clara Jones," he began, his voice firm. "The young woman who prevented a multi-million-pound error and has contributed real results to the pro bono program." Mr. Hayes coughed, uncomfortable. "We understand your enthusiasm, Carter, but Miss Jones is not a lawyer. Her involvement has generated compromising comments." Sophia crossed her arms. "We can't allow a cleaning staff member to question the firm's prestige." "Question?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Or fear? Because if it makes you uncomfortable that a girl with no surname and no master's degree is doing her job better than you, maybe we should talk about who's not up to par." Sophia shrugged but didn't respond. Mr. Hayes shifted in his seat. "What do you propose then?" Ethan walked to the center of the table and placed a printed document on it. "A new program, an open legal training program, with paid scholarships, access to intensive training, an invitation for non-traditional profiles. Clara will be the first to be accepted." "This is a law firm, not a charity," Mr. Hayes snapped. "And you are lawyers, not censors," Ethan replied, not losing his composure. "If a young woman in a gray uniform scares you, then she should be running this place." No one said a word. Ethan walked out, leaving the document on the table. He was no longer asking for permission. He was informing them. That night, Clara was still in the basement, going through boxes of cobweb-covered papers. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. She turned. There he was, Ethan Carter, without his jacket, with his sleeves rolled up. His gaze wasn't cold. It was different. More human. "You're still here," he said, as if surprised to see her working after what had happened. "I'm not doing it for you," she said, Without looking at him, "Miyama, I'm doing it for the people who need my help. For Mrs. Evans, for others like her, and for yourself," he added. Approaching, Clara turned to him. Her eyes reflected exhaustion, but not defeat. "What do you want?" "To tell you that I confronted the board. I informed them of the new program, legal, paid, fair, and I want you to be the first to join." She looked at him. Doubtful. "I don't need you to fight for me. I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I'm doing it because you deserve it, and because I know you won't fail." She looked down for an instant, then faced him. "Okay, but I only accept if the conditions are the same for everyone. I don't want favors, I want justice." He smiled, a sincere smile, without arrogance. "Then you'll have it." He turned to leave, but before he crossed the door, he looked back. "And don't let them make you doubt. They're not worth it." Clara was left alone, the echo of his words resonating in the basement. For the first time, she felt she wasn't fighting alone. The road would still be long, but she was ready. The rain fell heavily on the streets of London, forming puddles that reflected the faint light of the streetlights. Clara Jones stood in the basement of the Carter and Hayes building, leaning against the wall, holding a broom she had long since stopped using. Her eyes were red, not from tiredness, but from rage and shame. That very day, during the general staff meeting, Sophia Reynolds had made a point of publicly humiliating her. In front of dozens of employees, smiling with that venomous expression she had mastered, she blurted out, "We have to give credit to Miss Jones. Not everyone can clean floors, and at the same time get the managing partner's attention." Laughter erupted like a wave. The echo of the chuckles reverberated in the auditorium. No one said a word. No partner, no colleague, not even Ethan. Only she, standing in a corner, felt exposed in front of everyone. But the humiliation didn't end there. As soon as she left the event, she received a message from the hospital. Her mother needed urgent surgery. The cost, £20,000. Immediate payment. Clara collapsed into a chair in the basement. She gritted her teeth. She thought about everything she had fought for. The studies, the sacrifices, the rejections, the borrowed books, the sleepless nights. And now, what was left? Rumors, mockery, contempt, and her mother's health hanging by a thread. Without thinking twice, she opened her laptop. She typed quickly. "To whom it may concern, I hereby submit my resignation effective immediately." She sent the email and closed the computer, without looking back. When she got home, the air was filled with the smell of medical alcohol and silence. Maria slept with difficulty, the oxygen mask marking each weak inhalation. Clara sat next to her, stroked her hair, and couldn't stop the tears from running down her face. "I can't do this anymore, Mum," she whispered. "I'm tired." Maria barely opened her eyes. "Everything will be okay," she murmured. "I trust you." But Clara didn't. She no longer trusted anything. That night, she stayed awake, hugging a pillow and a pile of broken dreams. On the 42nd floor, Ethan Carter read her email with a frown. "Resignation effective immediately." He clenched his teeth, his fingers tense on the desk. His assistant had told him everything that happened at the meeting. The public mockery, Sophia's laughter, the partner's silence, and he hadn't been there to stop it. He slammed his fist on the desk, spilling coffee on some papers. Then he picked up the phone. "Get me Clara Jones's address, now!" The rain was still falling when he started his car. He had no fixed destination other than the doctor's area, Building 3B. He went up the rusty stairs, soaked without an umbrella. He knocked on the door hard. It took a while to open. Finally, Clara appeared with a distraught face, wrapped in an old sweatshirt. What are you doing here? Ethan was silent for a second. He looked inside the apartment. Worn furniture, a makeshift bed, Maria's silhouette on the bed. Clara, I know everything. About the hospital, the meeting, the mockery. You can't let them win. They already won, she replied with a broken voice. Do you want to come in and see how we live? How I fight every day, just so my mother can breathe. Do you want to see what it costs to survive? I can help you. I can pay for the surgery. Clara took a step back, her eyes on fire. What do you think I am? Do you think I'm for sale? Do you think I'm going to accept money in exchange for staying quiet? That's not it, he replied, lowering his tone. I don't want to buy your silence. I want you to keep going, to not give up on what you earned with your own effort. She was about to close the door, but he took a wrinkled envelope from his coat and put it in her hands. Read it. If after that you still believe I'm here out of pity, I'll leave and won't come back. Clara took the envelope with trembling hands. She closed the door without saying goodbye. She sat at the table, opened it, and read the handwritten letter. Clara, I don't know how to apologize. I never learned. But I owe you one. I failed to defend you. I failed to stop the mockery, to stop those who believe that merit is only earned with long surnames. I was like you, a boy without resources, mocked for dreaming of studying law, and I forgot what it felt like to fight for something that seemed impossible. You reminded me. Don't leave. Don't stop. Not because I need you, but because the world needs someone like you. Ethan. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. It wasn't a letter to convince her. It was a confession, a surrender, something only someone who had suffered could write. She got up, went to the room, stroked her sleeping mother's hair, and pressed the envelope to her chest. Maria always told her, "Don't let the world tell you you're not worthy." This time she would believe it. In his office, Ethan looked out the window, his hair still damp from the rain. He didn't know if Clara would come back, but he had told the truth, and sometimes that was enough. The next day, Clara was in the civil court, not as a lawyer, but as a supporter. In front of her, Rosa Evans, a single mother about to be unfairly evicted, trembled as she reviewed her file. Clara looked at Rosa firmly. "You're not alone. I'm with you." Although she was no longer part of the firm, she would continue to fight, in a uniform or without one. And at the back of the courtroom, sitting among the crowd, Ethan observed her in silence. With his heart in his throat and a certainty growing in his chest, he was in love. Not out of admiration, but out of respect. Let's have a little game between us. Write the word tortilla in the comments if you made it this far. Let's get back to the story. Courtroom 14 of the civil courthouse was filled with murmurs and tension. In the wooden benches sat neighbors, mothers with children, elderly people with documents in plastic folders, and legal employees with tired faces. Clara Jones held a folder full of documents, sitting next to Rosa Evans, the woman facing an unfair eviction due to an arbitrary rent increase. "Remember to breathe," she told Rosa in a low voice. "And don't worry if you get stuck. I'll help you." Rosa nodded, visibly nervous. She wore an old sweater, her hands clasped, and she kept looking at the landlord's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit, who reviewed papers with an air of superiority. The judge, a man with a serious face, called for silence. Then he gave the floor to the plaintiff. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, standing up, "my client simply exercised his right to raise the rent as stipulated in the contract. Mrs. Evans failed to comply with the new amount. Therefore, the eviction proceeds." Clara looked at Rosa and squeezed her arm. She stood up, her voice firm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I request to intervene as a voluntary legal advisor. I am not yet a registered lawyer, but I have studied this case in depth." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Does Mrs. Evans approve of you representing her?" "Yes, Your Honor," Rosa replied immediately. "She has helped me with everything. I wouldn't know where to start alone." The judge observed Clara for a moment longer, then nodded. "You may continue, but limit yourself to the facts and legal grounds." Clara opened her folder. "Your Honor, the landlord notified Mrs. Evans of the increase via a text message, with only 7 days' notice. According to Article 2477 of the Civil Code, for increases over 10%, there must be a written notification with at least 60 days' notice. This requirement was not met." She took out Rosa's phone and showed the printed conversation. "Here is the proof of the message." The landlord's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge stopped him with a gesture. "Continue." "Furthermore," Clara said, pulling out a printed court ruling, "in the case Evans v. North Group, 2010, it was determined that any increase not communicated in a timely and proper manner is invalid and voids the eviction procedure." The silence in the room was absolute. Rosa looked at Clara as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The judge took a few minutes to review the documents. Then he spoke in a grave voice. "The eviction is denied. The contract remains in effect under the previous terms. The landlord is sanctioned with a fine and ordered to reimburse legal costs." Rosa put her hands to her face. She cried. Clara hugged her tightly, without saying a word. At the back of the room, a man in a dark gray suit, with a neatly trimmed beard and an intense gaze, watched it all. Ethan Carter did not move or intervene. He just watched her, with a mixture of pride, respect, and something deeper that he didn't want to name. Until now. That night, Clara returned to her apartment exhausted, but happy. Rosa had offered her money, food, a hug. She only accepted the hug. At home, Maria was waiting for her, sitting with a blanket on her legs. "Did you win?" "Yes, Mom. Mrs. Evans isn't going to lose her home." Maria smiled tenderly. "I always knew you were going to help a lot of people." Clara sat next to her. On her desk, Ethan's letter was still folded, with something wrinkled on it. Despite everything, she hadn't forgotten it. She knew he had been at the hearing. She felt him. She saw him when she left, walking out unnoticed. The next day, she received an email. "Dear Clara, the Open Legal Training Program has been officially approved. Attached you will find the formal invitation to join as a participant. It will be paid. And this time, it is not a favor. It is recognition. I want to see you here. Ethan." She didn't respond immediately. She spent the whole night thinking about it. Her pride was still hurt, her dignity wounded. But a part of her knew that she had won something more important, the voice of those who have no voice. In the end, she accepted. 2 weeks later, she appeared at the firm in borrowed clothes, a white blouse, simple trousers, and a jacket that was a little too big. The training room was filled with graduates from private universities, with their branded backpacks and polished manners. As she entered, they looked at her out of the corner of their eyes. No one greeted her. But Clara was unfazed. She sat at one of the tables and took out her notebook. She knew she wasn't there to make friends. She was there to learn, grow, and prove that her place was no accident. Ellen Carrillo, the lawyer in charge of the program, handed out the first case study, an international dispute between 2 companies over breach of contract. "You have 3 days to submit a complete analysis," she said, "and on the day of the presentation, it will be evaluated as if it were a real case." Clara didn't blink. She had faced more difficult things. The next night, she locked herself in the firm's library, reading international law treaties, reviewing similar rulings, and filling her notebook with annotations. At home, Maria watched her from her bed, proud. "You look happy," she said one night. "I am, Mom. Not because of where I am, but because of what I'm building." Meanwhile, Ethan received daily reports from the program. Ellen was impressed with Clara. "She has something that can't be learned in any university," she told him on the phone. "She asks the right questions. She sees errors that others don't even notice, and she works as if her life depends on it." Ethan listened in silence, not saying what he felt. Clara inspired him, not because of her story, but because of her spirit, because she reminded him of the young man he had been, but with a dignity he himself had forgotten. The day of the presentation arrived. The boardroom was filled with partners, lawyers, and evaluators. Clara was the last to present. She stood in front of the screen with her folder in hand. "Good morning. The case presented to us has a clause that violates the principle of proportionality in the collection of international penalties. Clause 12.4 imposes a 20-feet fine without justification. That is not valid under the Hague Commercial Law or the Vienna Convention." Everyone was silent. One of the partners frowned. Ethan, sitting at the back, couldn't stop looking at her. "I propose renegotiating the terms," Clara said. "Not to avoid conflict, but because defending what is fair is what gives us authority as a law firm." She finished her presentation without a hitch. She returned to her seat, her heart racing but her head held high. That same afternoon, she received a notification in her email. "Your analysis has been selected as the basis for a real case we will handle next month. Congratulations." And along with that message, a shorter one. "Stop by the office. There's something I want to give you." Ethan. When she arrived at his office, he was waiting for her with a card in his hand. "It's your legal intern badge. But more than that, it's proof that you're not here by chance." She took it. Their fingers brushed. There was a dense but not uncomfortable silence. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't give you this," he replied. "You earned it yourself. I just opened the door." She looked down, but her lips formed a slight smile. "And by the way," he added, "about the hospital, you no longer have any debts. But you'll never know who made the donation." She looked him straight in the eyes. "I know it was you, and even if I don't say it out loud, thank you." He didn't respond. He just nodded slightly. Between them, the respect was mutual. But something more was beginning to blossom. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was something more real, something that was built day by day. 2 years passed since that day, when Clara Jones first stood in front of a room full of lawyers to present her legal analysis. 2 years since she had decided to walk with a firm step, not only for herself, but for all the people like Rosa Evans, who needed a voice to speak for them. Now, Carter and Hayes had a new space on the 42nd floor. A small but bright office with a plaque on the door that read, "Clara Jones, Legal Advisor in Training." The same space that once served as a storage room for brooms, rags, and buckets. Clara sat at her wooden desk, dressed in a navy blue blazer, her hair in a neat ponytail, and a folder full of files on her table. She no longer wore a cleaning uniform, but she had not forgotten who she was or where she came from. Every day, when she arrived, she would pass through the cleaning area and greet each of the people who worked there by name. "Good morning, Maria. How's your son?" "He's good. Thank you, ma'am," the woman would say, smiling sincerely. That morning, Ethan Carter was waiting for her in the meeting room. He looked more relaxed, his jacket hung over the back of the chair, and a cup of hot coffee in his hand. "Ready to close the social housing project?" "More than ready," Clara replied, sitting next to him. "We did a great job, and the clients are happy." In those 2 years, Ethan and Clara had worked side by side on the pro bono program. They expanded together. Cases of unfair evictions, unpaid pensions, labor disputes. She would study them, handle them, and fight for them. He would take care of opening doors that had never existed before. There was never any favoritism, never any condescension, only respect and an increasingly deep admiration. As time passed, they began to get to know each other beyond their professional relationship. Not in a romantic way, at first. Just long gazes, late-night conversations, comfortable silences. One day, while they were reviewing a case together, Ethan stopped and said, "You know what I envy most about you?" "My talent?" she replied playfully. "No, your strength. You never break." "Of course I break," she said. "I just know how to put myself back together." That's when he understood. He wasn't admiring Clara as an employee. He respected her as a woman, as an equal, as someone who had come to change his life forever. But Clara was not a woman who would be swept off her feet easily. She needed certainty. And Ethan, accustomed to being in control, learned to let go. Little by little, the lines between the personal and the professional began to blur. Without rushed promises, without dramatic phrases, just real moments. 3 years later, Clara finished her master's in international law with honors. She had studied for nights on end, drafted dozens of cases, and passed the final exam with a special mention. The firm celebrated her achievement with a modest gathering on the terrace. "Miss Martinez," Ethan said, raising his glass, "let's toast to someone who once mopped this very floor and now teaches us all what dignity means." She smiled, not vainly, but gratefully. That same year, Clara and Ethan walked into a London family court. She wore a simple, loose white dress, without frills. He, a light gray suit without a tie. There was no party, no press, just a judge, her mother Maria sitting in the front row, and a few close friends, including Ellen Carrillo, Mr. Hayes, now less arrogant, and even Sophia Reynolds, who after years of resentment finally accepted that Clara was not a threat, but a symbol that everything could change. "We are here to unite, not two lawyers," the judge said, "but two people who believe in the power of truth." Clara held Ethan's hand firmly. He handed her a piece of paper with printed letters. "Another clause?" she asked, smiling. "A lifelong contract," he replied, laughing. "Soul clause. We will walk together as equals, always." She signed. He signed. And the entire firm, for the first time in a long time, applauded from the heart. Over time, Clara's story became an inspiration. Not for the romance, not for the professional transformation, but because she never stopped being true to her values. She visited public universities to give talks, promoted scholarships for students without resources, and created, along with Ethan, a community legal fund for women victims of workplace abuse. One day, during an interview for a legal magazine, she was asked what changed her life. She didn't talk about Ethan, or the firm, or the awards hanging on the wall. She said, "The moment I refused to clean with my head down, not out of pride, but because I understood that no one gives you dignity. You take it." Now, every time someone new joined the open legal training program, they found a letter on their desk, handwritten by Clara. "Welcome. It doesn't matter if you come from a distant neighborhood or an unknown university. If you are here, it's because you have something no one can buy. Character. Make it count." And at the bottom of the letter, she signed, "Clara Jones, lawyer, woman, fighter, and very proud of it." Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, I invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us what part touched your heart and what rating you give it, from 0 to 10. See you in the next story.